Dear students, now we are going to study chapter 2 of your themes in Indian history, that is kings, farmers and towns. Till now we have studied chapter 1, which was bricks, beads and bone, throwing light on your first urban civilization, that was Indus Valley civilization. After its decline, now it's the Vedic period, when the Vedas were composed. People now began the settled life. Then there emerged Janapadas and Mahajanpadas. The chapter is kings, farmers and towns. Kings, early monarchies or republics. Farmers, agriculture developed by use of iron technology, and towns developed on the river banks, many were in the land routes from where the trade began. So we are going to study in chapter 2 of your NCERT, that is kings, farmers and towns. Now part 1, we are going to throw light on what are the sources to know about the history of this period. How do we come to know about kings, farmers and towns? The period from 600 BC to 600 CE. So 16 Mahajanpadas, the Buddhist texts which are mentioned about, the 16 Mahajanpadas, which were Ganatantras or monarchical kingdoms. We are going to study about the Janpadas and Mahajanpadas later on in this chapter. Then an early empire, that is the rise of Mauryas, an establishment of an all India empire. The new notions of kingship which developed in the post-Mauryan period, and what was the popular perception of the king. What did the people know about their kings? That historians have reconstructed through Jataka and Panchtantra stories. All these we are going to throw light on in chapter 2, that is your kings, farmers and towns. Now before beginning of a chapter, the history of the period, what are the major sources to reconstruct the history of that period? How do historians understand? What are the sources? Like in IVC, Indus Valley Civilization, we discussed that various artifacts were there from the ruins, the buildings, the seals, which threw light on that civilization, as the writing was not deciphered. But this was the period when Vedas were composed. Now the various sources to know about this period, that is wide range of sources we have. Inscriptions are there, texts are there, coins, that is your punch marked coins. Later on, development of your gold, silver and copper coins. Then visual materials, which include fine pottery, bowls and dishes with a glossy finish. The period was of northern black polished ware, probably used by rich people. Then ornaments tells about the living of the people, the life of the people, the various tools, weapons, vessels, figurines, and a wide range of materials that were found of gold, silver, copper, bronze, ivory, glass, shell, and terracotta. Then various Buddhist texts and Jaina text also gives an insight into the history of this period. Now, what are the main developments which took place? From 6th century BC, we are going to study about 6th century CE. Then what are the main developments on which we are going to focus, dear children? We'll focus on the period when Rig Veda was composed along Indus and its tributaries. The 4 Vedas, the Rig Veda earliest, Atharva Veda, Yajurved and Samved. Then agricultural implements were found made up of iron, and there were various agricultural settlements which took place in many parts of the subcontinent, like Deccan, Karnataka, and North India. Then pastoral population in Deccan. Next, that is megalith burials. I'll show you what type are megalith burials. The burials made up of stone, elaborate stone structures, and dead were buried with rich range of iron tools. We'll found a large number of megalith burials in South India. You'll really be marveled by how they had made the stone burials. Then emergence of early states, your empires and kingdoms. New cities and towns like Patliputra, Takshila, Ujjaini, Mathura appeared, and the sources to understand, as I told, that this is inscriptions, coins, and your various texts, Buddhist, Jaina text, various foreign travelers like Megasthenes, who was the Greek ambassador in the period of Chandragupta Maurya. Then we have Kautilya's Arthashastra to understand about this period. From the writings of various Chinese pilgrims, Fa Yan and Huensang. Then we have from our Indian writers and poets like Kalidas, who wrote Abhijan Shakuntalam and Meghadutam in the period of the Guptas. So all we are going to discuss in this chapter, dear students, I'll show you in details, I'll tell you. Now the Rig Veda, as I told you, the Vedas, the word derived from the Vid, that means knowledge. Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Yajur Veda and Athar Veda and other religious and literary works are invaluable source to know about the history of this period. Now who is this person? I'm showing you here who is this person. James Prinsep. Dear students, we are indirectly indebted to the British. It was in their period, as they were interested in knowing the history of India, to understand the history of India, its language, its culture, its traditions, as they wanted to prolong their rule in India so that they could rule India well. And hence, they founded Archaeological Survey of India, Asiatic Society of Bengal, there was Mint Society, and James Prinsep was an English scholar, Orientalist who studied about East antiquarian, and he was the founding editor of the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal, and he is remembered for deciphering two ancient scripts, that is Kharoshti and Brahmi scripts of ancient India. Now, after deciphering the Kharoshti and Brahmi, what did we come to know? Who were our great rulers? Especially, we came to know about Ashoka the Great. At that period, Brahmi and Kharoshti, these two scripts were there, and it was used in inscriptions and coins. And there is a mention of a name of a king, Piyadasi. What does it mean? Piyadasi means pleasant to behold. Few inscriptions are mentioned as Ashoka. It is from that we come to know that Piyadasi, Devanam Piyadasi, that is Devataon ko priya lagne wala, pleasant to the gods. He was none other than the king Ashoka. This gave new directions to investigations into political history of India. Now once the Brahmi script, the Kharoshti script was deciphered by Sir James Prinsep, historians now, they started investigating into the political history of India, especially European scholars and even Indian scholars, about our inscriptions and texts to reconstruct the history of major lineages. What were the major ruling dynasties in India? Focus on the context of political history. They focused on the political history of India, the rule of major lineages, their administration, army, all in details. And of course, wherever there is a political history, wherever there is a rule, there is a society, social and economic development takes place. Hence, there is a close connection between political history, social and economic. Next, that is your epigraphy and paleography. Now, students, what is epigraphy? It's the study of written matter recorded on hard or durable material. The term is Greek, derived from the word epigraphen. Study of ancient languages and scripts. It is epigraphy which was found on inscriptions, copper tablets, plates, etc. And paleography, paleo means old, graphy, writing. Study of ancient writing. Its description, that is the Kharoshti script, which was major script at that time, spelled Kharoshti or Kharoshti, formerly called Aryan Pali, was an ancient Indian script used in the region Gandhara, that is your present-day Afghanistan, to write Gandhari in Prakrit and Sanskrit. This language was this script was used in Central Asia. Next, it is the Brahmi script, the modern name for writing system of ancient India, Brahmi. This writing system or script appeared as a fully developed universal one in South Asia in the 3rd century BC. Ashokan scripts are mostly in Brahmi, Kharoshti and in Aramaic. See here, it's Brahmi and Kharoshti. Epigraphists, they have studied, they have deciphered what the script actually means. And paleographic, that is the ancient writing, the study of ancient writings. Now, the major developments that took place, kings, farmers and towns, as I told you all in the beginning. King, he rules where? In a state. So, emergence of early states. The 6th century BC is regarded as the major turning point in the history of India. You can get here a question in the board examination. It's important that why is 6th century BC regarded as a major turning point in the history of India, either in 3 or in 8 marks. If this question comes, you have to emphasize use of iron technology. Use of iron. Iron was used at that time for making weapons. The Aryans came, they were known to iron, and they cleared the extensive forest and settled themselves for agriculture. So, implements of agriculture could be made from iron. So, iron was helpful not only for making weapons but also for making various tools and implements. Development of various coinage and currency, including your gold, silver and copper coins. The punch-marked coins of the Mauryan period. In the Magad it was used. So how did coins and currency develop in the later topic? We'll discuss in details about this coinage and currency. The next, emergence of early states and rise of diverse system of thought, Buddhism and Jainism, which is in your chapter 4, thinkers and beliefs. Rise of Buddhism and Jainism, in that we'll be discussing. I had mentioned of megalith burials, and here you could see megalith burial. Megalith, large stone burials. Lithic means stone. These are the burial chambers built of large stone slabs laid on the edge and covered with earth or other smaller stones. You could see how artistic they have built in this image, and they differ from contemporary long barrows through their structural use of stone. You could see the stone burials. Mostly in South India, you'll find the megalith burials, and is to make these burials and bury their dead bodies with iron implements. Now, in the Vedic period, when the settled life began, each of the tribals who were there, they now started settling themselves in a territory. And these territories were called Janpad, means where the people settle down. In UP, still the districts are known as Janpads. And these were republics and kingdoms. And when these Janpads took a large form, it was called Mahajanpada. Buddhist text mentions of 16 Mahajanpadas, which we'll be studying in this chapter. Now, which Buddhist text mentions? According to Anguttara Nikaya, Mahavastu, and Bhagavati Sutra, which is Jaina text, both these texts refers to 16 Mahajanpadas in India. These were Kashi, Kaushal, Anga, Magadha, Vajji, the powerful ones, Malla, Shedi, Vatsa, Kuru, your Hastinapur, the famous Mahabharata in the battle of Kurukshetra, Panchal, Matsha, Surasena, Asaka, Avanti and Gandhar. Now, what type of rule was there in these Mahajanpadas? Few were Ganas and Sanghas, that is your oligarchy. Last year, in your empire across the 3 continents, you have already studied about the Roman Senate, that it comprised the nobility. The nobles were there who ruled. Later on, the plebeians also joined it. So, oligarchy means the rule by few people. Both Mahavir and Buddha, who were the religious thinkers, they belong to such Ganas. In an oligarchy, collectively the power is shared among the people called Raja, and decision is taken. Gana Sanghas, it is also a republic or oligarchy which was mostly prevalent in eastern part of the subcontinent. The Gana Sanghas were found in the periphery of the Indian kingdoms, tended to occupy higher ground. And one example I can give you here, it is your Shakyas, of which the Buddha belonged to. Then Vajji Gana Sangha, present day your Vaishali, which in the state of Bihar, the state capital was Vaishali, and Rajas controlled the resources. An important resource at that time, since the economy was agrarian, it was land. So collectively they controlled. Then let's have just a look on the Mahajanpadas, the regions. Your Magad, the most powerful Mahajanpada, state of Bihar. Anga, also your Bhagalpur, capital as Champa, Kashi, Varanasi, that is Banaras, Kaushal, Sravasti in the Faizabad region, Malla, Kushinagar, the place where Buddha breathed his last, Nibbana of Buddha, Kuru, your Hastinapur, Haryana and Delhi region, Shedi, Shaktiman, eastern part of Bundelkhand, Panchal, capital was Achitara in the Kampilya, Surasena, Mathura, Brajmandal area, the land of Lord Krishna, Matsya, Viratnagar in Rajasthan, Avanti, capital Ujjain district, Gandhara, present your Afghanistan, the famous University of Takshila, Kamboj, that is your Hataka, Punch area it is in Kashmir, Ashmika, Patali, between river Narmada and Godavari. Vatsa, that is your Kaushambi, near Allahabad, it is Mirzapur. And Vajji is your present Vaishali. It's map of the 16 Mahajanpadas along with their capital cities, which you have to mark in your board examination. Map question can come, map work can come from this. So it's important for you all to practice this map. Now, what were the features of Mahajanpadas? As I mentioned, there were 16 Mahajanpadas, which were either oligarchic republics or monarchies which existed in ancient India. And religion practiced was Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism. Language spoken Prakrit and Sanskrit. Then the characteristic feature of each Mahajanpada was, each Mahajanpada had a capital city which was fortified. Why did it fortify the capital city? Probably that was there to defend them from the enemy, like the capital of Magad, Rajgir or Rajgaha. It was surrounded by hills and 5 walls so that enemy could not attack. Those days cannons were not known. Then each Mahajanpada, for the protection of the territory, you need an army. To govern it, you need administration, bureaucracy. So each had a standing army and bureaucracy. Now when the king rules, society develops. There needs certain rules and regulations, the code of social conduct. At that time, for first, Dharma Sutras were written. Dharma Sutras, Sanskrit word which means righteous thread, written by Brahmanas like Apstamba Rishi, Gautama Rishi, Bodhanya Rishi. They laid down the rules for rulers, and the rulers according to it were expected to be the Kshatriyas. We'll be discussing about the 4 Varnas in the next chapter, kinship, caste and class. Then these rulers, they collected taxes and tribute from the cultivators, traders and artisans. Even to increase their income, they were allowed to raid on neighboring states, which was legitimate means of acquiring wealth. Dharma Sutras, you could see here, I have written it here, manuals of human conduct. They consist chiefly of sutras, of brief rules containing the essentials of law concerning interpersonal relations, relationship between people and the state, practical rules of caste, and social, economic and religious relations of that period was mentioned in Dharma Sutra. Now Magad next, which is in the state of Bihar with Rajgaha or Rajgir as its capital, emerged as the most powerful Mahajanpad. Here, powerful Ajatshatru, and the father of Ajatshatru was Bimbisar. It's an image of the 2 famous kings, Ajatshatru and Bimbisar of Magad. Then capital of Magad, that is called Rajgaha in Prakrit, the home of the king. You could see here in the picture how it was surrounded by the hills and walls, that is natural fortification. After these Mahajanpadas, Magad, which emerged as the most powerful Mahajanpada, now growth of Magad culminated into establishment of an empire. An empire, we call it, because it almost the entire part of this country till your Afghanistan and Bangladesh Mauryans established, that is why it is called the first empire. Mauryan Empire. The last ruler of the Magad was Dhananand. Nowadays, Chanakya serial is being telecasted. You must be seeing about Chanakya or Kautilya, who was the teacher, professor of economics in the University of Takshila, that is your present day Afghanistan. Chanakya Niti, it's very famous in management. It was Chanakya who identified Chandragupta Maurya, it is said, when Greeks, Alexander had invaded India. He went to the court of the last ruler of the Nandas, Dhananand, to inform him about the invasion of Alexander, but Dhananand did not listen to him, rather he insulted him. So at that time, from the northwestern frontiers, it was the time of invasion of Alexander. Chandragupta Maurya, who is the founder of Mauryan Empire. His origin is again shrouded in mystery. Few historians say that he belonged to Shudras. Few say that he was of Maurya tribe in Piplava. Whatever it is, there is no fact in history. It's only legends are there. Chanakya identified Chandragupta, who was ambitious man. He gave him the trainings of warfare, and with the help of Chanakya, he defeated the last Nanda ruler, Dhananand, and established the Mauryan Empire in 321 BC, which extended control till Afghanistan and Balochistan, an empire which had large parts of the subcontinent. He was succeeded by his son Bindusara, and after Bindusara, it was his son Ashoka, about whom we come to know in the history, Ashoka the Great. It was the Kalinga War which changed Ashoka, the grandson of Chandragupta Maurya, who expanded the vast Mauryan Empire from Afghanistan in the east to Bangladesh in the west. Ashoka the Great. Why do we call it Ashoka the Great? Ashoka wanted to conquer the entire parts of India. Ashoka. And he couldn't conquer Kalinga. The king of Kalinga refused to accept his sovereignty. Therefore, he attacked on Kalinga. But this war transformed him. The lots of bloodshed which was there in this war transformed Ashoka. He adopted Buddhism. He spread the message of Dhamma throughout India and across the world. We'll be discussing about Dhamma later on in this chapter only, that what were his policy of Dhamma. Why is called Ashoka the Great? Why do we call him? Question must be in your mind. No other great ruler of the world made such a sacrifice for the common people, that is, he worked for the mankind on the principles of Dhamma. It is said that he considered his subjects as his children, and he did a lot for the widows and orphans. He spread Buddhism in every corner of the world. and is called Ashoka the Great. He took up a small religion and he turned into a global one. That is, from India he spread to other parts of the world. A tolerant ruler who respected all the religions, and he was the first to get open hospitals, not only for the treatment of the people but also for the pets. Patliputra, the present city of Patna where we are living in, the capital city. At that time, the architecture, the buildings were made up of wood. And this city had 64 gates. 64 gates were there. For your knowledge, in GK quiz, a question is asked, how many gates this city had, the ancient city? It had 64 gates located on the confluence of river Ganga, Gandak, Son. Now, how did this city, this Patliputra, the ancient name of Patna, the capital city of Bihar, got its name? It's said that from a Patli tree, a Patli Grama was there. That is, Patli tree was there here. Legend says that named after a queen, a legendary king, Putraka, created this city by magic for his queen, Patli. There is Patan Devi from there also, Patliputra, few historians say. And its ancient name is Kushumpura, also Pushpapuram. Important images of Patliputra from its ruins. The first one in black and white, you could see it here. It's Kumbharar. Perhaps now, since the building was made up of wood, it has not survived. This place was the palace of Chandragupta Maurya. Megasthenes, in his Indica, the Greek ambassador who was there in the period of Chandragupta Maurya, he has mentioned that this palace was even more beautiful than the palace of Persepolis, which is in Iran. Since the building, as I mentioned, made up of wood at that time, it has not survived. Down you could see, built on a raised platform, the city of Patna, Patliputra. And here, that is how the city looked like. The third image. Now, for knowing an empire for a period, again, how do historians reconstruct? There are many legends are there, inferences of the historians, but what are the major authentic sources which gives an insight to reconstruct the history of the Mauryan Empire? Again, a question can come in your board exam, that what were the sources to know about the history of the Mauryas? Megasthenes, who was the Greek ambassador, he has written Indica, an account of Mauryan India. The original book is now lost. It's not there, but its fragments have survived as the quotes which were used in that. The fragments of it was used by Greek and Latin scholars later on. And the earliest of these works are by Cerulus, Strabo, Pliny and Arya. That is, they have written parts, the quotes which were there, the fragments of it which had survived. Again they wrote, these scholars based on it they wrote Indica, but the original one is lost. Then Kautilya's Arthashastra, again its original version had been lost, but it was found by R. Sharma Sarthi, that is a professor in Mysore University, written on Tadpatra. which was an important book on statecraft, divided into 15 parts, 160 chapters, 6,000 verses and 380 shlokas. And it's an important book, Chanakya Niti, which we call it, written by Chanakya or Kautilya, who was the professor of economics, Arthashastra, in the University of Takshila, Gandhar. Then various literary sources are there. Buddhism spread till Sri Lanka, hence Ceylonese chronicles. Chronicle means a long history. Dipavamsa and Mahavamsa. Bhadrabahu wrote Kalpasutra. Vishakha Dutt has written Mudraksha, which tells how Nanda dynasty was destroyed by Chandragupta Maurya. Buddhist and Jaina literature, and Buddhism and Jainism were two major religions. Chandragupta Maurya was a Jaina. Last days he left for Shravan Belangola, that is your Suvarnagiri, and there he spent his last days. He was a Jaina. He followed Jainism. Then various Purans, which gives us information about the Mauryas. Ashoka the Great, who got inscripted his messages of Dhamma, the code of conduct, on rocks and pillars throughout the empire. We also have it in the state of Bihar, in Loria, Nandangarh. We have inscriptions of Ashoka in Vaishali. Then at Sarnath, where Buddha preached his last, and the lion capital, which is the national emblem of India. These inscriptions tells that how Ashoka unified his empire, how he spread and how he unified his empire. Then apart from all these, there are various other sources to make us know. That is your punch-marked coins. Stupas, we'll be discussing in details about stupas and thinkers' beliefs. Monuments of this period, the pottery and other artifacts, northern black polished ware, various monuments are there. Your Barabar caves, which is in Gaya, then Yakshini or Chawar bearer, Didarganj Yakshini, which is at present in Bihar Museum. Now, Ashoka's Dhamma. A question must be rising in your mind that what is Dhamma? Why did Ashoka adopt this policy of Dhamma? It was the Kalinga War, its consequences. He wanted to be Digvijayi, that is, victory in all directions. And when the king of Kalinga did not accept his sovereignty, Ashoka attacked. But this war changed Ashoka a lot, as there was lots of bloodshed in this war. It changed, a major change to his personal life, where he adopted a policy of religion, that is Dharma Ghosha. He stopped eating meat, hunting, abandoned the life of luxury. The prisoners of war were treated now well. They were used for agricultural work, which increased the production. Dhamma, a Sanskrit word which means code of righteous conduct. Inspired by the human values, you could see here the teachings, the conduct based on the teachings of Buddha. What should be the code of conduct of the people? People should live in peace and harmony. Ahimsa, that is non-violence. Injury to non-living and non-living creatures. Love, tolerance and respect to other religion. Children should obey elders and sense of understanding should be there. People should be truthful, charitable, even kind to their servants and slaves. All this was engraved in the pillars, that is, we call the Edicts of Ashoka, collection of more than 30 inscriptions on the pillars as well as on the boulders and the cave walls attributed to him, written in Brahmi, Aramaic and Kharoshti. Aramaic, that area, your Afghanistan side, and Kharoshti script. This is the rock and the pillar edicts of Ashoka, which we get it throughout the country. Then which places his major and minor rock edicts, you have to know, that is from the map of Ashoka. It is here his edicts were in which places. Loria Nandangarh, as I mentioned, it's in Ariraj of your state. Then we have Kaushambi, Meerut, Delhi, Topra, Girnar in Gujarat, Sopara. All these places, Amravati, Ashokan edicts were there. Now, when Mauryans established their empire, whenever you establish an empire, for administrating it, you need a large number of people. Mauryans had vast empire, as I mentioned. And the major sources to know about the administration, about how it was governed, how efficient was their administration, we know from Kautilya's Arthashastra and Indica of Megasthenes. According to Kautilya, which elements make a state? For a state, a Raja, that is a king or Swami, is needed, a Durg or fort, Mitra or ally, Kosh, that is treasury, is needed for running it, Bala or army is there. So these elements make a state. Now Mauryans had vast empire, into which provinces this empire was divided for administration. North, that was Uttarpat with Takshila as its capital. Dakshinpat, Suvarnagiri in south with as its capital. Parichapat with Toshali or present Kalinga. And Avantipat with Ujjaini as its capital in the west. North, south, east, west. And capital city was Patliputra. Now whenever vast empire is there, it is again divided. Everything king can't do. Of course, king is the head of the administration. You can see here, like present day we have in our country, the center, the state, the districts again into blocks, and then the lowest unit is village. At that period, it was the same. And a large number of officers, ministers, bureaucrats were there to administer the empire. King was the head of the administration, commander-in-chief of the army, and major decisions were taken by the king. Below him, the prime minister was known as Amatya. Chanakya was Amatya of Chandragupta Maurya, the prime minister, who was assisted by council of ministers. Then center was further divided into states. The provincial administration, whose head was Kumar. The governors, at present also in the state we have head as governors. The governors were called the Kumars, who were usually the member of the royal family. They administered the provinces and maintained peace and order there. The provinces were further divided into districts, and head of district administration were Rajukas. The districts were further into tehsils under a sthanika, and the lowest unit of administration was village administration under a gramika, who was the head of village panchayat. And there was a gopa who had for every 10 village as the head. Unlike present, Mauryans also had judicial system. Judiciary was there. Civil and criminal court. The civil court was called as Dharmashthya, and the criminal court to decide criminal cases conduct Shodhana. And strict punishment was given for crime. Fines were imposed for smaller offence, but for bigger offence, bigger crime, even death punishment was given. Then unlike today, they had espionage system also. There were reporters throughout the empire to give report to the king. Mauryans performed various public welfare functions for the convenience of its people. Apart from these public welfare functions, the provincial functions, the administration, now we shift to the capital city, Patliputra. How was the capital city administered? Very efficient, you could see it here. It had board of 30 members, which were divided into 6, and 5 members were there into each of these committees, which looked after the registration of birth and death, of health and hygiene, that is your sanitation was maintained. A large number of foreigners came to this city, so influx of the foreigners encouraged trade, sale and purchase of the goods, levied taxes. All these was the functions of these, managed by the various committees which was there in the center, that is your Patliputra. Then Mauryans had vast army. Vast army was there. Army was divided into foot soldiers, which is said 6 lakhs, cavalry, your 30,000s, elephants 8,000, and chariots 8,000. Then there was navy also for wars. Then the head, there are various heads, like today we have heads of army, air force and navy. Similarly, they had head. The head of navy was called Navadhyaksha, cavalry Ashwadhyaksha, foot soldiers head was Padadhyaksha, elephantry Hathi, that is Hathadhyaksha, as elephant was also major mode on which they fought, and chariots were used, that is your Rathadhyaksha was there. And each of these, now such a vast army, very efficiently managed. It was very efficient army, and it was managed by a committee and different subcommittees who looked not only after the need of the army, its weapons, provided food for the soldiers, fodder for the animals, transportation and recruitment of soldiers and its various heads of different parts of the army. Payment of the soldiers, they were paid well. Then city administration, there was a Nagar Adhyaksh to look after the city administration. Then we come to know about the Mauryans. It was Ashoka who unified, vast administration of the Ashoka, who unified his empire by sending Dhamma Mahamatas. Who were Dhamma Mahamatas? They were the officers of Ashoka who were appointed to spread the message of Dhamma throughout the empire. Thus we can say that the Mauryans had a vast administration. You could see here, after studying that large number of ministers, the officers and clerks were there to assist. Like present day, we can call it administration, as we have vast administration. Next comes the topic, which is, was Mauryan Empire an all India empire? Historians, especially the British scholars, have considered it to be an all India empire, a major landmark in the history of India when it was under colonial rule after Sir James Prinsep deciphered the Brahmi script. As some of its archaeological findings, including the Scum sculptures, were considered to be examples of spectacular art typical of empires at that period. The nationalist leaders, as I told, of 20th century regarded Ashoka as an inspiring figure, as inscriptions have suggested that he was most powerful and industrious and humble than later rulers who adopted grandiose title. That is why he is called Ashoka the Great, the greatest ruler of that period, who had unified his empire, spread the messages of Dhamma. After the Kalinga War, when he adopted Buddhism, he became a just and benevolent ruler, more humble than the later other rulers. That is why the nationalist leaders, they cite the example in 20th century of Ashoka the Great. But again, there is a question that was it an all India empire? Can we call it? It's not that we can call, even though the empire was vast, huge administration, large administration, army, everything was there. But it was not so important in the history. Why? Because it ruled India for about 150 years, whereas other empires ruled even more than that. Then it extended its control from northwest of Afghanistan and Baluchistan and the south up to Andhra Pradesh. But we could see the emergence of important chiefs at that period. It was who were independent chiefs, that is the Cheras, the Cholas and the Pandyas. And administrative system was not similar in all the regions of the Mauryan Empire, more stronger in the capital city than in the provinces. Even it is said that they exploited Deccan just for its gold mines, not for ruling Deccan. So Mauryan Empire could not be called an all India empire. After the Mauryas, the post-Mauryas, what were the new notions of kingship which developed? So till now we studied about Mauryan Empire. That was it an all India empire, as I told you, that they ruled for 150 years, which was not too long in a vast country like India. Moreover, if we see the map of the Mauryas, we find that the rule was still only Andhra Pradesh. And administration was also not similar. It is also said that they were not interested in ruling Deccan, rather to exploit the gold mines of Deccan. The new chiefs emerged in the 2nd century BCE. So new notions of kingship after the Mauryas, that is in the post-Mauryan period. Now what was it? On which features we are going to highlight after the downfall of the Mauryas? Various chiefdoms emerged. The chiefs In the south, which were powerful Cholas, the Cheras and Pandyas. In the Tamilkam area, we call it, that is present-day Tamil Nadu. It also your parts of Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, it comes. Now these chiefs, they were the kings or the rulers who performed special rituals, leadership in the warfare, and they settled many disputes. These chiefs, they acquired wealth, we come to know, through Sangam literature. Sangam literature is an important source to know about the history of South India. Through Sangam literature, we come to know that these chiefs were powerful. They collected the wealth through taxes from the people. They used it for their own resources and also distributed it among their kins, among their officers. So these chiefdoms were the Cheras, the Cholas and the Pandyas of Madurai, the famous Meenakshi temple. It was of the period of Pandyas, which has famous in the world, UNESCO World Heritage Site, 11-story Gopuram. This Chola, the Rajeshwara or Brihadeshwara temple, built in Tanjavur by the Cholas. In Themes in Indian History, Part 2, we are going to study about it, this Rajeshwara temple in Bhakti Sufi traditions. Now, there are many kings who were chiefs like Satavahanas. Next chapter, we are going to study about Satavahanas also, the rulers of Deccan, that is your western and central India. It is said that they were the Brahmins, the Shakas, who were the rulers of Central Asia and established kingdom in northwestern parts of the subcontinent. They claimed social status through religious rituals and marriage alliances. Next, what developed, that is the period of Kushans. 1st century CE, Kanishka, the famous Kushan ruler who introduced Greek coin in India, gold coin on the Greek pattern, that is one side was the image of Greek gods or the king on the other side. Now the Kushans, when they came to India, they believed in that they ruled according to the divine right theory, that is, king was the representative of God on the earth. They considered, like Chinese, God-like and adopted the title Devaputra or son of God. For this, they got their huge colossal statue made up of single stone installed in a shrine at Mutt near Mathura so that people could see, and this way they imposed their sovereignty on the people. Also, make the people worship the king. The kings were the representative of God on this earth. And we come to know the history of Kushans through their inscriptions, through their coins. The first one to introduced gold coins in India. Then the Gupta period, the 4th century CE, Guptas, whose rule is also considered as a classical age or the golden period, as lots of development took place in this period. Firstly, they were dependent on Samans. Last year we have read about the feudalism. That is, Samans were feudal lords, the governors who maintained land and they collected the resources, that is the taxes from the land, paid tribute to the king and also maintained army and provided military support to the rulers whenever there was a need. Many of These later on, after the downfall, it is said that many of these Gupta rulers became subordinate to powerful Samans. That is, the feudal lords. Like in Europe, many of the feudal lords had become powerful than the king. So similarly here, feudal lords, the Samans, became powerful than the king. Now the Guptas, who were the Guptas, we are going to discuss it. Many poets composed poem in praise of them. Factual information, that is the attributes of the king, we come to know from this composition. And they compared, that is the rulers were equal to gods. It is one of the famous Allahabad pillar inscription, which we call it Prasashti. There is a source also, Prayag Prasashti. Prasashti means in praise. If we write in praise of the attributes of the qualities of a person, that is called Prashasti. And Prayag Prashasti was composed by Harisen, who was the court poet of the famous Samudragupta, the famous ruler, who is also known as the Indian Napoleon. The Gupta dynasty, that is the rulers of Magad, same this place, state in northeastern India, and they maintained empire over entire northern and parts of central western India from early 4th to 6th century CE. In the map you could see the vast extent of the Guptas, and the Guptas had powerful rulers, Chandragupta I, Samudragupta, Chandragupta II, the famous Vikramaditya, Kumargupta, Skandagupta, Purugupta, Buddhagupta, Narsimhagupta, Vishnugupta, Kumargupta II. The main rulers were Chandragupta I, the Samudragupta, the most powerful, the Indian Napoleon. He also had many attributes. He was an accomplished veena player, welfare-loving king who did a lot for his subjects. And Chandragupta II, the most famous Vikramaditya in the history of India. Now, what are the sources to know? One of the sources, it is given in your book, that is your Prashasti or the pillared inscription. It was the stone pillar inscription of Ashok. On that only a Prashasti has been written in praise of the king called Samudragupta. Origin of the Guptas, again it's obscure. Few say that they were the feudal lords, that is why they were the Vaishyas. Few say that they were the lower origin Shudras. But since Chandragupta I, he married the Lichavi princess Kumaradevi, there is also a coin. Guptas also issued gold, silver and copper coins. There is a Chandragupta and an image of Kumaradevi. It's called Chandragupta Kumaradevi coin. We know that historians have concluded that the Guptas were Kshatriyas. Then various literary compositions in the period of Guptas, that is why it is called the classical age. Kalidas, Abhigyana Shakuntalam, Meghadukam, Kamandakas, Nitisar on statecraft, Vishakadat, it's a drama on Devi Chandraguptam, when it is said that the Shakas attacked Ramgupt, who was the brother of Vikramaditya or Chandragupta II, and he was the ruler, and the Shakas attacked on his kingdom, and the enemy was camping, and the Shakas entered there, and they wanted that his wife was Dhruvaswamini, to take Dhruvaswamini to their camp. It was when they had entered in the camp, Vikramaditya, Ramgupta was not that powerful like Vikramaditya, though he was the ruler. The Shakas entered and they killed Ramgupta. It was at that time that Chandragupta II, he saved the Shaka, he took the command and he defeated the Sakas, and he married Dhruva Swamini, who was the widow of his brother. Then Shudraka's Mrich Katikam, it's again a play which will give an insight into the Varna system. Inscriptions of Gupta period, Mathura, Junagadh, various private records which was donated by wealthy merchants to religious institutions. It also gives an insight, the coins, major source to know of the economy of that period, how prosperous it was, gold, silver and copper coins. Like coins of Samudragupta throws light on his military expeditions. Is called, as I told you all, Indian Napoleon. Then various prashastis, which was written by the court poets in praise of the king. Chinese travelers had visited in that period of Fayan and Huensang. Artifacts, the structural temple. In the 4th chapter, we'll be reading about it, the temples of Gupta period, the sculpture, and most important, which is the iron pillar at Mehrauli. If you have seen Qutub Minar, it's in the Qutub complex, which has not rusted so far, which indicates that they excelled in metallurgy. Even after so many years, it has not rusted. You could see here the Prayag Prashasti, that is the pillared inscription image I'm showing you. It was also known as Ashok Stamba, erected by Emperor Ashok, the emperor of the Mauryan dynasty, who reigned in 3rd century BC. While it is one of the few extant pillars that carry his edicts, it is particularly notable for containing later inscriptions attributed to Gupta emperor, composed by Hari Sen. So it was Ashokan pillar, on that Hari Sen has written in praise of the Gupta king. Next we'll be doing about the popular perceptions of the kings, the Jataka tales. What were the Jataka tales? It was on the life of previous birth of Buddha. Since inscriptions, or even you can call it the coins, the currencies, could not throw light much on the odd life of the ordinary people. That is why historians took recourse to Jataka tales and Panchatantra, that is the story of animals which has morale in it, written by Vishnu Sharma, to know about the condition of the subjects and what did they think about the rulers. Hence, Ganda Tindu Jataka, the Buddhist text we can call it, the Jataka stories on the life of previous birth of Buddha. Ganda Tindu Jataka tells us about the popular perception of a king. In this story, it's a story of a king who was the ruler of Panchal, capital Kampila. The ministers of the king were corrupt. They used to extort lots of taxes from the people. Hence, to escape from these notorious, the corrupt ministers, people used to escape every day into the forest. They used to put the thorns in front of their houses so that if anyone tries to enter in their house, thorns will prick. They used to escape in the forest so that the ministers, when they come, the king's officials, when they come, they are unable to take taxes from them. And in the night, they used to come to their houses. It is also said that in the night they were attacked by the robbers. The king worshipped Tinduka tree, which was, you can call it, the Kul Devata, was there in that tree to whom the king worshipped. And one night, the king saw the king saw in his dream that Lord Tinduka had come to the king in his dream. In fact, it is said that Buddha had come. And he advised king that, oh dear king, you see how your ministers, your officers are troubling king, your subjects. You're not knowing anything about it. One day you'll be ruined. You go and see what is the plight, what is the condition of your people. Hence the king disguised himself, Besh Badalkar, and he went to the villages. He interacted with many people, and each one cursed the king. They told that the king was a wicked one who took his officials, his ministers, troubled, they were corrupt, they extracted lots of taxes, and people used to escape during the day into the forest, and the night they returned back. And even they were not safe in his kingdom. So the king realized, it is said in the story, the king realized. But through this, what do historians infer? What do they conclude? That mainly the king extracted taxes, since it was agrarian economy, the king extracted lots of taxes from the people. And the people were overburdened with taxes. Next, part 2, we'll discuss about the remaining part of the chapter. We'll discuss about the sources. Now it must be clear to you all, the kings, farmers and the towns. That is, next part we'll be discussing about the agricultural development, the life of the people, that is village artisans, coins and currency and inscription. Thank you for listening to my session. If you liked my class, please like and subscribe it.